The turkey wasn't even in the oven when I realized this would be the last time I ever cooked for my daughter. My name is Clara. I'm 68 years old, and I'm a widow. My late husband built this spacious house with his own two hands, and for nearly 4 decades, it has been the beating heart of our family. But this Thanksgiving morning, the vibe in my own kitchen felt entirely different, cold and foreign. My only daughter, Brooke, marched through the front door with her husband, Trevor, trailing right behind her. There were no warm hugs or friendly greetings. Instead, they brought boxes of decorations, bags from an overpriced catering company, and the bossy attitude of a pair of site managers. "Mom, move these old pots out of the way. The catering staff needs counter space for the silver platters," Brooke ordered, shoving my trusty everyday cookware into a dark corner of the counter. I didn't raise my voice. I just watched her hands push my things aside like they were nothing but clutter. For the past few years, ever since she married Trevor, her desperate need to impress his wealthy family had completely overwritten the girl I raised, rather than starting a fight that would ruin my morning. I quietly took my things and tucked them away in the lower cabinets. "The space is yours for the day," I replied calmly. It wasn't submission. I was just conserving my energy. I'd learned the hard way that arguing with Brooke when she was in hostess mode was a lost cause. I retreated to the living room, leaving her and her hired help to stress over perfection. As I settled into my armchair, I noticed Trevor visually measuring the space between the fireplace and the bay windows, tapping numbers into his phone. There was a weird urgency to how he moved, a possessive familiarity that made me narrow my eyes. Something was seriously off about how they were walking through my halls. They weren't acting like guests, or even like kids visiting their mother. They were acting like new owners doing a walkthrough. By noon, the doorbell was ringing off the hook, and the house was packed. Trevor's family arrived in a swarm, led by his mother, Patricia, a woman who always looked like she was mentally appraising the price of whatever chair she happened to sit on. Brooke introduced me almost as an afterthought, flashing a tight smile and apologizing for my apron, even though underneath it, I was wearing a perfectly elegant dress suited for the occasion. "My mother is just very traditional," Brooke told Patricia, using that condescending tone people usually reserve for toddlers or the elderly they no longer deem useful. I refused to play their little game of appearances. I said a polite hello, offered them a drink, and slipped away to the sunroom. A few minutes later, Brooke stormed in, arms crossed and scowling. She demanded I go to the kitchen to make sure the servers didn't scratch her new china, and told me to take over pouring the welcome drinks because she needed to attend to her real guests. I looked her dead in the eye, my teacup steady in my hand. "You brought your own catering staff. Brooke, I own this house. And today, I've decided to rest. If you're worried about your china, go watch them yourself." The color drained from her face for a split second. She was so used to me caving just to keep the peace, stepping back to be the invisible helper so she could shine. She spun on her heel and stormed off, muttering under her breath about my lack of support. I went back to my reading, suddenly struck by a surprising wave of mental clarity. The line of respect had been crossed a long time ago. But today, it was too obvious to ignore. Still, the real shock wasn't her attitude that afternoon. It was what I stumbled upon by pure accident on the study desk a little while later. I went into the study looking for my reading glasses, which I'd left on the desk. Right there, next to the desktop computer, Trevor had left his briefcase unlatched, and a thick folder was sitting out in plain sight. I'm not the type to snoop, but the big, bold letters on the cover immediately caught my eye. Maple Drive Remodel Project. I put my glasses on and opened the folder. Inside were detailed blueprints of my house, an expanded kitchen, an open-concept living room, And the real kicker, my master bedroom was relabeled as home, gym, and office. Stapled to the plans was an approved contractor quote for over $85,000, along with a printed email from Trevor to Brooke. It read, "The home equity loan is almost good to go. Once your mom signs the deed transfer this month like we agreed, we break ground. The lease for that little studio apartment for her is already locked in." My blood ran cold, but my pulse stayed remarkably steady. For months, they'd been pressuring me to sign the property over just to save on future estate taxes, promising me up and down that absolutely nothing would change while I was alive. I had started the paperwork entirely out of trust. Now, I saw the ugly truth. They were going to strip me of my home and ship me off to some tiny, rented shoebox of an apartment. I didn't cry. Tears are for things you lose without warning. This was a calculated betrayal. I closed the folder and left it exactly how I found it. I walked over to the painting that hid my wall safe, punched in the code, and pulled out the original deed to the house, my banking tokens, and my investment portfolio, right then and there. I pulled up the banking app on my phone. We had a joint checking account for emergencies, an account I funded 100% with my own retirement savings, sitting at about $30,000. I transferred every single red cent back into my private, individual account. If they were going to treat me like a piece of obsolete furniture that needed to be put in storage, it was time I managed my assets with the exact same cold calculation they were applying to my future. By 3 p.m., the smell of the Thanksgiving feast filled the house. Brooke started herding the guests toward the main dining room. The table was a massive, sturdy oak piece my late husband and I had bought with our very first real savings. It comfortably seated 14 people. I walked toward the dining room at a relaxed pace, holding my dinner plate. When I got to the doorway, I stopped dead in my tracks. Brooke was assigning seats like a general commanding a battlefield. Patricia was seated at the head of the table on the right. Trevor took the left. Trevor's uncles, cousins, and close family friends filled out the sides. My 16-year-old grandson, Julian, was seated near the middle. I scanned the table, counting the chairs one by one. There were 14 people in the house, but only 13 chairs set up at the main table. "Looks like we're missing a chair," I said, my voice perfectly normal and even, standing right next to the wooden buffet. The low hum of chatter instantly died. Several heads snapped in my direction. Brooke froze with a glass of wine in her hand, visibly annoyed that I had interrupted her perfect social choreography in front of her mother-in-law. She let out a dramatic sigh, rolled her eyes, and marched over to me. "Mom, please, don't make a thing out of this right now. The table setup only allowed for 13 chairs, so the floral centerpiece would look right. We just don't all fit, aesthetically," she whispered. Though she said it loud enough for the people nearest to us to hear, I didn't budge. I kept a firm grip on my plate and looked her dead in the eye. There wasn't an ounce of apology on her face, just the irritation of someone dealing with an old piece of furniture blocking their path. I glanced at Patricia, who was suddenly fascinated by her linen napkin. Trevor stared down at his phone, playing the coward. Not a single person at that table, guests I had personally opened my door to, was going to say a word. I was just about to set my plate down and walk away when my daughter decided to cross the absolute point of no return. "Mom," Brooke said, straightening her posture and projecting her voice so the whole room could hear, desperate to validate her authority in front of her new in-laws. "You can just eat in the kitchen. There's plenty of space in there, and you'll be more comfortable. The real family sits here." The silence that followed was deafening, heavy and ice cold. 10 years of putting up with little slights and microaggressions all boiled down to that one sentence. The real family. In the house my husband and I built, eating off the plates I bought, under the roof I paid for. Suddenly, the harsh scrape of a chair being pushed back broke the tension. Julian, my grandson, jumped to his feet, his face flushed with anger. Grandma, come here. Take my seat, or I'll go eat in the kitchen with you, the boy said firmly, stepping toward me. Brooke shot him a death glare. Julian, sit down right now. Do not ruin dinner, and do not make a scene. He hesitated, caught between obeying his mother and his own moral compass. I gave my grandson a genuine, warm smile and gently shook my head. Don't worry about it, honey. You're the only real man in this room today. Keep your seat, I told him. Then, I turned back to my daughter. My hands weren't shaking. I walked slowly over to the buffet, carefully lowered my plate, and set it down next to the silver serving trays. I looked at her with the absolute calm of someone who has nothing left to lose and nothing left to beg for. You're absolutely right, Brooke, I said, my voice crystal clear and perfectly steady. The real family sits here. Enjoy your dinner. I didn't wait to see her reaction. I turned around, walked down the hallway, grabbed my purse, and walked right out the front door. I didn't slam it. I didn't yell. There were no theatrical theatrics, just the solid, final click of the deadbolt locking behind me. The crisp November air hit my face the second I stepped outside, but I had never felt so clear-headed. I got into my car, put the key in the ignition, and pulled out of the driveway. I didn't just drive around aimlessly, and I definitely didn't pull into a grocery store parking lot to cry. I drove straight across town to a bright, cozy little condo I had bought 2 months ago as an investment property, completely under the radar. It was already furnished with the basics. When I walked in, I tossed my keys on the kitchen counter and quietly brewed a pot of coffee. While the water was heating up, I pulled out my phone and sent a direct text to my estate attorney. Arthur, whom I'd already been consulting with just in case. Arthur, halt the deed transfer to Brooke immediately. Revoke the power of attorney. Everything stays in my name and under my sole control. I didn't need a messy legal battle, and I wasn't plotting some movie villain revenge. The reality was so much simpler and far more grounded. The house was mine. The $30,000 in the joint account, the money she had been casually dipping into to pay for her luxury catering, and the deposits for her little remodel was safely sitting in my private account. They had built their entire house of cards on my dime and my property. Assuming my patience was just weakness, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker on in the distance. I felt so light, like I had finally shrugged off a soaking wet, heavy winter coat. I was done paying the toll for their disrespect. I made myself a simple sandwich for dinner and just sat back and waited. I knew exactly what was going to happen the second Trevor tried to swipe that joint debit card to pay the caterers at the end of the night. Barely 5 hours after I walked out my own front door, my phone lit up on the coffee table. It was Trevor. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Hello, I answered, my tone completely neutral. Clara, please, you need to come back to the house right now. Trevor's voice was shaking. The arrogant guy who was measuring my living room earlier was totally gone. The catering manager just tried to run the joint card and it declined. And worse, Arthur just called my cell. He said the deed transfer is permanently canceled on your orders. What is going on? We have the home equity loan pre-approved. Clara, please, just come back and let's talk about this. I could hear the absolute chaos in the background. Brooke was screaming hysterically, demanding to know how they were going to pay the remaining $4,000 catering bill. Underneath that, I heard the awkward, hushed whispers of Trevor's family, who were still stuck there, watching their daughter-in-law's wealthy facade crumble in real time. Arthur called you because I told him to update you on the legal status of my property. Trevor, I said, hitting that word hard. As for the debit card, I moved my funds. If you hired a luxury catering team, I assume you have the means to pay them. Mom! Brooke shrieked, clearly ripping the phone out of his hand. You can't do this to us. You're ruining us in front of Patricia. Get back here and fix this. You told me to eat in the kitchen because I wasn't the real family, I replied, with ice-cold calm. So, I stopped funding your family. I'm not coming back tonight. I'll be there tomorrow at 10 a.m. Have the decency to be the only ones there. I hung up the phone, turned the ringer off, and went to bed. At exactly 10 a.m. the next morning, I unlocked my front door and let myself in. The smell of cold gravy and spilled wine still hung in the air. The living room was a disaster zone, and sitting on the sofa looking pale, exhausted, and sporting massive dark circles were Brooke and Trevor. Patricia and the rest of the peanut gallery were long gone. Julian was sitting halfway up the stairs, quietly watching. Do you have any idea how humiliated we were last night? Brooke snapped the second she saw me. Though this time, she didn't sound bossy. She just sounded desperate. We had to beg Trevor's mom for a loan just to pay the caterers. The bank is going to pull the remodel loan if the house isn't in our name. I walked into the center of the living room and stopped right in front of them. I didn't sit down. That is exactly the point. Brooke, I started, my voice unwavering and rock solid. You plan to gut my house, spend my money, and ship me off to some cheap rental, banking on the fact that I would just quietly fade away. You treated me like a nuisance in my own dining room. The house is mine. The money is mine. If I'm such a burden that I need to be hidden away, then you don't have to put up with me anymore. Trevor dragged his hands down his face. Clara, we messed up, but we already put down a $10,000 non-refundable deposit with the contractors. We already broke our lease on our old apartment. We literally have nowhere else to go. You have 30 days, I dictated. You have 30 days to find a new place to live and pack your things. I will be staying at my condo for the month. As of today, the water, electricity, and maintenance bills for this house are entirely your responsibility. Brooke stared at me like she didn't even recognize the woman standing in front of her. She tried to play her final card, but she didn't realize I already owned the whole deck. If you kick us out like this, I swear to God, you will never see Julian again. Brooke hissed, deploying the oldest, cheapest, emotional blackmail in the book. Before I could even open my mouth, my grandson's voice echoed from the stairs. He stood up, his backpack already slung over his shoulder. I'm 16. Mom, I know how to ride the bus, and I have my own phone. I'll see Grandma whenever I want to, Julian said, with a level of grit that made my chest swell with pride. He looked at his parents with pure disappointment, then walked down to me. I'm heading to the library to study. Grandma, I'll call you later. I kissed his forehead and watched him walk out the door. Without her son to use as a human shield, Brooke completely deflated. Trevor just stared at the rug, silently calculating the financial ruin they were about to face for spending money they never actually had. I walked over to the hallway console table, grabbed the spare set of house keys Trevor kept in the drawer, and dropped them into my purse. Like I said, 30 days. I'll be coming by with a locksmith on the first of the month to change the deadbolts, I stated matter-of-factly. I went upstairs to the master bedroom and packed 2 small suitcases with my clothes, and the last of my valuables. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody said a word. I walked back down, the wheels of my luggage bumping softly against the hardwood stairs. When I reached the front door, I turned back one last time. "Make sure you leave the kitchen spotless," I said. I walked out, shut the door, and got into my car. The silence I left behind in that massive house was infinitely heavier and way more permanent than the silence at the dinner table the night before. It's been 6 months since that Thanksgiving. I'm living in my condo now, a bright, sunny spot that's a breeze to clean, and where absolutely no one tells me where I'm allowed to sit and eat. I've gotten my peace of mind back, and my finances have never been more secure. Brooke and Trevor had to scramble to rent a cramped, overpriced apartment way out in the suburbs. Without my house and my emergency fund propping them up, their illusion of wealth collapsed overnight. Patricia and Trevor's family distanced themselves pretty quickly once they realized Brooke wasn't the heir to some massive real estate portfolio, but just a woman living miles beyond her means. She learned the hard way that people who only value you for what you can pay for will vanish the second the money dries up. Brooke and I have a distant, but polite, relationship now. She calls every now and then. She's never offered a formal apology. Her pride is still too big for that, but her tone is cautious now. Almost respectful. She knows there are steel boundaries in place that she cannot cross. If we ever get close again, it will be on my terms. And on my turf. Julian comes over to visit every single Sunday. We cook together without any stress or fancy centerpieces, eat at my little round kitchen table, and talk for hours. The other day, he told me that watching what I did taught him more about self-respect than any advice he'd ever been given. At 68 years old, I learned the most important lesson of my life. Generosity without respect isn't love, it's just a tax you pay to be tolerated. And I decided I was done paying it. I kept my keys, my money, and my dignity. And every single night, I sleep like a baby, knowing that I am the absolute master of my own space and my own life. If this whole ordeal taught me anything, it's that while family love might be unconditional, respect should never be optional. For the longest time, I confused patience with being a doormat, thinking that giving up my space, my money, and my voice was the only way to keep my daughter close. I learned the hard way that you cannot buy your place in someone's heart. Giving endlessly to people who don't value you doesn't breed love. It just breeds a nasty sense of entitlement. If they banish you to the kitchen in your own home, the answer isn't to try to cook a better meal or bend over backwards to please them. The answer is to grab your keys, pick up your dignity, and walk right out the front door. Setting hard boundaries doesn't make us bitter, and it doesn't make us the villain of the story. It simply puts us back in the driver's seat of our own lives. At the end of the day, you can't put a price tag on your peace of mind. And the greatest act of self-love is finally realizing that our worth does not depend on the seat someone else decides to give us.